Commissioner Severson.
Here.
Commissioner Meyer. Absent. Commissioner Vita. Here. Commissioner French.
Here.
Commissioner Forney, absent. Vice President Hassan.
Here.
President Bourn.
Here.
Commissioner Meyer.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you. I would entertain a motion for the approval of the agenda.
So moved.
It's been moved. Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion on the agenda? Seeing no discussion, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstentions, the agenda carries. I would entertain a motion for the approval of the minutes for October 17th, 2018.
So moved.
It's been moved. Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of Secretary Ringgold.
Commissioners, I wanted to note one error that we made in the minutes as we reflected and consulted with the motion maker. So under the resolution for the committee that would look at glyphosate, did I say it correct?
People have this weird tendency to switch their places.
Glyphosate, correct?
That works.
Yes,
Yep.
thank you, Commissioner Severson. The amendment actually that was final in terms of the appointments is that it should be appointed by each commissioner and not come back for confirmation to the board. The 6 technical experts would come back for confirmation to the board. So we will correct the minutes. They are currently not correct, but we will make that administrative correction.
I think we would take that by consent. Thank you, Secretary Ringgold. Is there any other further discussion on the minutes of October 17th? Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstentions, the motion carries. Reports of officers, Superintendent Merrill.
Thank you, President Bourn. There's a lot going on as we prepare for the upcoming winter season. So first of all, I'd like to talk about our maintenance staff. They are getting ready. They're getting the ice rinks ready, and they're installing the berms for the skating season, preparing the goals for hockey and broom ball rinks, prepping the warming rooms, and so on and so forth. In addition, they're kind of getting our parks ready for the long season. They're mulching and blowing the leaves, and they're closing various steps in certain locations, so be watching for that where it will say you are not able to utilize the steps. They're removing and storing away the tennis nets and replacing ball field drags with sanders and plows on our vehicles. The water assets were removed as of Halloween, October 31st. And standalone restrooms have been closed for the season, except at the Sculpture Garden, and that will close after the Thanksgiving weekend. And they're continuing to repair our pools, specifically the Lupien splash pad. All seasonal gardeners have been laid off as of October 31st, and all seasonal park keepers have been laid off as of October 24th. And so that's getting us ready for winter. And from environmental management, the MPRB Water Resources staff has successfully completed the 2018 lake monitoring system or season. Our lakes are sampled once in the spring, fall, and winter, and twice per month during the summer. The sampling program focuses on nutrients and chloride, which the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency uses to determine whether or not lakes are impaired or are making progress toward improved water quality. The next lake sampling will be conducted this winter on top of the ice. The 2018 stormwater monitoring season has also been successfully completed. Water Resources staff monitored stormwater at 4 sites that represent different land uses within the city of Minneapolis. Staff also monitored 3 different stormwater best practices, sand filter and underwater infiltration fault, an infiltration basin, and the sculpture garden stormwater capture and reuse irrigation system. Practices like these are used to treat stormwater prior to discharge into our lakes, creeks, and the river. Knowing their performance characteristics informs future capital expenditures. Samples from more than 10 different rain events, greater than 1/10 of an inch, were collected at each site. In our recreation centers, I am happy to say that the recreation centers hosted 28 Halloween parties over the past week, and there were over 10,000 people, children and their families, who attended the activities throughout the city. It was highlighted by the Minnehaha Falls of Fun, the Halloween Spooktacular at Farview, and the Dia los Muertos celebration at East Phillips. Under youth development, Teen Teamworks has filled 12 of the 24 school year employment positions that are available. The youth can connect with Youthline staff if interested in working in independent placements within the Youthline staff. You know, our Youthline program normally consisted of crews, but these are independent, individual placements that we have going during the school year. Just one last thing I was gonna share. In terms of athletics and our youth sports, we just wanted to announce that the championships were played for football on Sunday, October 28th at Washburn High School. And the 12U champion was Creekview Knights. The 12U runner-up was Falwell Lions. The 14U champion was North Commons Bulldogs. And the 14U runner-up was Harrison Hornets. Registration is taking place now for winter sports. The sports leagues of broomball, basketball, and volleyball. And in aquatics, this is really, I hope you'll be able to help us with this. Our fall lifeguard training classes are being offered at the Indoor Phillips Aquatic Center. It's a great opportunity for our young people to actually prepare themselves to be in position to have jobs in the summer. We are always in need of lifeguards, so if you know of a young person who is a swimmer and would like to become a lifeguard, please get them involved. Call us. And then in terms of golf, Theodore Worth has closed for the season. Gross and Meadowbrook will close beginning this Saturday. And then Columbia, Hiawatha, and Fort Snelling will stay open on a day-by-day basis, weather permitting. Okay, thank you, that's what I have.
Thank you, Superintendent Merrill. I'd also like to take a moment. Council Rice has an introduction for part of his team that for a face that we'll be seeing a little bit more of. Council Rice.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to introduce to the board Alana Mosley. Alana just joined our firm 2 weeks ago.
No, October 22.
Okay, the time's going by. Alana's graduated from Sibley High School in St. Paul, went to Concordia and University of Minnesota, graduate this year, studied for and passed the bar, and was admitted to the bar 3 weeks ago.
Yes.
And last week she argued a motion for the park board for a matter that Michael Schroeder and Adam were working on the Glenwood land swap. So we're excited to have her. She's already got involved in some litigation. She'll be helping on the FEMA appeal, and we're excited to have her, and the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you. I'm excited to get the opportunity to work with each and every one of you and get to know all of you better. Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you, Ms. Mosley, and welcome to the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board. Moving on into the consent agenda, I would entertain a motion for resolutions 2018-310 through 2018-318.
So moved.
It's been moved. Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. I did not see, is your light still on, Secretary? I did not see who, Commissioner Musich.
Yes, I'd like to pull resolution 2018-318 for discussion.
2018-318 has been pulled. Is there any further discussions on 310 through 317? Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of 2018 310 through 317, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstentions, 2018 310 through 317 carry. 2018-318 is a resolution approving the amended and restated agreement for a Minneapolis Youth Coordinating Board for a period of 5 years, January 1st, 2019 through December 31st, 2023. And Ms. Ann DeGroot from the Youth Coordinating Board is here. Commissioner Musich, would you like to discuss something first, or was it for a
I
presentation
just thought
from Ann?
since Executive Director DeGroot is here that it probably would be nice if we heard from her. So
Fantastic.
that was the reason I pulled it.
Fantastic. Well, welcome, Ms. DeGroot. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. President, Commissioner Musich, and Park Board Commissioners for inviting me today to speak a little bit about the Youth Coordinating Board before approving the Joint Powers Agreement for the next 5 years. I also want to thank you for being part of the Minneapolis Youth Coordinating Board for the last 33 years and for being part of this grand experiment designed by Mayor Frazier, his staff, and Superintendent Richard Green all those years ago to find a new way to help improve the well-being and healthy development of children and young people in Minneapolis. The Minneapolis Youth Coordinating Board, as many of you know, is made up of 4 public jurisdictions: the City of Minneapolis, Hennepin County, the Minneapolis Public Schools, and of course the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board. This model doesn't happen anywhere else in the country. We're the only place with a Joint Powers Board of public jurisdictions looking after our children. It's a very powerful model, and when our members come together, 10 elected officials from 4 public jurisdictions, we can do an awful lot for our kids in ways that none of us can do independently as much. I want to especially thank Commissioner French, who is your current designee, and Commissioner Musich, who has been the designee preceding him, for their work on that board. It's an extra commitment, and I know it takes more time, but it does make a difference for us and our children in the city. I also want to recognize the valuable work of the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board to the children of Minneapolis. You are the one place, your parks, all of your programs, that our children and young people can come to pretty much most of the time. We're hoping they're not there at 1 in the morning, but pretty much most of the time, and find someone to talk to, something to do, and a trained adult to help them do what they want to do. It's a tremendous and valuable resource. We have the opportunity to work frequently with both Teen Teamworks and Youthline, and have found your staff absolutely wonderful to work with, and we found them to be people who care deeply about the city and about children, and who understand the value of working cooperatively. So I want to just let you know that out there in the community, we love them. They're great. So thank you for being part of this. We look forward to the next 5 years. Maybe I'll see you before then, but I like to come every 5 years, and I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. DeGroot. Is there any other discussion on the resolution? Commissioner French.
I just want to say thank you, Ann DeGroot, for all the work you've done and all the future work you will be doing in the Youth Coordinating Board. And I just wanted to say thank you.
You're welcome. If I may, one more thing. We are doing a citywide youth and children master plan this year, And I'd just like to introduce Michaela Ferg, who is an AmeriCorps Vista staff person who is coordinating the master plan. We will have something for everybody to look at next summer. So I wanted to let you know that that's underway, and just had a great conversation with Tyrese Cox about more involvement from the park board on that. So we really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gruden, and again, thank you to the Youth Coordinating Board for all of the work that you do. I think that there's a continuous and strong commitment from the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board, and I think everybody on this board is excited about what we can do, the things we can do even more, the bigger things we can do together. Superintendent Merrill.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to the comment on the Youth Coordinating Board, having been a part of the original group way back when, that came together to say that we needed to do better by our youth. And I'm proud to say that Youth Coordinating Board has been forward-looking and been a part of a lot of the youth initiatives in this city for that length of time. And I congratulate Ann DeGroot on her work there and her staff, and congratulate the board on continuing their commitment to working in support of youth in the city of Minneapolis.
Thank you, Superintendent. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of Resolution 2018-318, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstentions, the motion carries. Moving into unfinished business, we have a guest this evening. Folks will remember about a month ago, a little more than a month ago, I had assembled for my own advice a blue ribbon task force of former elected officials and leaders in the city of Minneapolis to help us to provide advice to this board on an incredibly complicated and timely issue around the topic of commissioner compensation. So I'd like to welcome Park Board President Tom Nordyke, who I asked to chair this advisory committee, and he has a report to share with the board. President Nordyke.
Thank you. Mr. President, Commissioners, thanks for having me today. I'm going to apologize in advance for what is probably a very boring report. So try to hang in there with me, and we'll get through it. Sip your coffee. I'm here today to present some thoughts and advice on the current level of Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board compensation and benefits for commissioners. As per President Bourn's request, Minneapolis City Council member Lene Palmisano, former Minneapolis City Council members Elizabeth Glidden and Robert Lilligren, as well as Minnesota Council on Latino Affairs Executive Director Henry Jimenez, and myself, met to review the roles and responsibilities of the Park Board Commissioners and advise on appropriate compensation and benefit, as well as give an opinion on appropriate inflationary adjustments over the next 8 years. In front of you, I believe you were given this, you'll find our thoughts and advice of my colleagues and myself. We're not an official group. We were not an official group, nor were reacting with any authority. Rather, we view our role as that of experienced public servants advising the president and, by extension, the board on the subject of park board compensation and benefits. What you see in the letter in front of you is an agreement between all of the members of our team on what we think we would advise you to do going forward.
President Nordyke, if I can interrupt for just 1 second. Thanks. I'm assuming and hoping that you will read the letter. I think it was emailed to commissioners prior to the meeting, but I wonder, we actually don't have hard copies of it in front of us.
Oh, you don't? That's okay. This actually basically just transitions into the body of the letter. I didn't want to just get up and read it.
Okay.
Straight up, so.
Secretary Ringgold has just an update on where commissioners can find it, I believe.
Yeah, we can make copies, but it's also attached to petitions and communications on the existing agenda.
Okay.
Thank you. My apologies, President Nordyke.
Totally fine. Now we actually literally are getting into the body of the letter. I just wanted to be a little more informal up front. So it was our view that as an informal group, we would not engage with the current park board commissioners or past park board commissioners, nor would we solicit input, either public or private, but instead rely on our own experience to advise the board. We felt it should be noted that if the board chooses to move ahead with anything related to compensation and benefits, there will be ample opportunity for public engagement and input. We did not feel it was our place to assume that role. We do hope that the board accepts this communication in the spirit in which it is given, which is public and friendly advice from other experienced fellow public servants. We also feel it's important to acknowledge that the current broader discussions about Park Board Commissioners' roles, responsibilities, the diversity of the board, and equity within the system in general exists. While we are all committed to addressing these issues, they were not what we were asked to comment on. Our group met twice the past month. First meeting was limited to the discussion of our charge, timeline, the process, if any, that we wished to follow. And our second meeting was a review of the information provided by Park Board staff and a discussion which culminated in the letter that you have in front of you now. With regard to the specific issue of Park Board Commissioner compensation and benefits, we reviewed information provided by the Park Board staff on the history of compensation, history of the adjustments to the compensation, current benefit packages for commissioners, and the compensation of other public institutions comparable to the Minneapolis Park Board. Those documents are available to you and attached to the letter that you received. We also reviewed current duties and responsibilities of commissioners. That information is available on the Park Board's website if anybody's interested in that. The current review indicated to us that the current compensation package for the Park Board commissioners is not out of line with that of other comparable entities, given the duties and time commitment of the board as it currently operates. Given that, we are advising the following. First, that the Park Board's history and its approach to setting compensation has been almost entirely political in the past and based very loosely on measurable factors. We would strongly advise that the board adopt some process that is measurable, accountable, and transparent going forward on this issue. Second, if the board does choose to consider an adjustment to its compensation in the absence of a defined process, we would advise that they adhere to the current Park Board tradition and do so in the last year of this term for implementation in 2022 when the next term begins. And finally, we believe that the broader discussion of Park Board Commissioner roles and responsibilities, diversity of this board, and equity within the system in general is important. However, discussion of that broader issue should be undertaken in a clearly defined process that engages the community at a level that is expected of the Park Board, which should be an independent, in-depth, transparent, and objective process. With regard to the issue of inflationary adjustment for commissioners' compensation, we believe that the board could move forward now with the adoption of a process similar or identical to the process established by the City of Minneapolis. In brief, the process is the yearly increase of City Council compensation is pegged to the average annual across-the-board percentage salary increase of the collective bargaining agreements in the preceding year. That can be found incidentally in Council Resolution number 2017-0562, which sets the mayor and council salaries for 2018 through 2021. This process has been well vetted and removes as much of the politics of decision-making as possible. We realize, of course, that the Park Board will go through its own public process in adopting this and adapting it to what is unique about the Park Board. So for all of us, I'd like to express our thanks to President Bourn for the opportunity to serve the Park Board. We're all committed to the success of this institution and its unique and vital role within the city. So thank you for your time.
Thank you for your report, President Nordyke, and thank you for your work, and to council members Lilligren, Glidden, Palmisano, and Henry Jimenez.
I'm sure they all desperately wanted to be here this evening.
President Nordyke, are you interested in standing for questions from the board, or were you here to deliver a
Absolutely,
report?
whatever you prefer.
And just as a reminder for folks, these individuals all served at my request in an advisory capacity to me to pass on information to you. This is advice that you can accept or not, but while we have President Nordyke's expertise here, do folks have any questions for their work that they have done for us? Commissioner French.
Yeah, I guess I have one question about, you talked about common practice is for the previous board to make that decision so it takes it out of the hands of the next board. Is that a common practice throughout boards the size of this, like city councils, small city councils, or other boards of this nature?
It really varies. You know, I believe, and I think Councilor Rice could probably correct me on this, is I believe that the way that this park board has done it in the past does fall more in the category of tradition as opposed to adopted policy or legal requirement. I think that this board really can do whatever it wants, whenever it wants. There are other municipalities locally that can't do that have set policies on how they do that. But for you guys, I believe it's tradition and it is at your pleasure how you choose to do that. But it varies from municipality to municipality.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner French and President Nordick. Are there any other questions or comments? Commissioner Colgill.
Thank you so much for this report. I think it's fantastic, and the recommendation seems very thoughtful, and I hope that my fellow commissioners can think about when this makes most sense to move forward. I have kind of, at this point now that there's been thought about this, I feel pretty confident about the idea of moving forward with a transparent process as is recommended and emulating what has been done at the city. So again, really appreciate the time and thoughtfulness that you put into this.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Colgill. Commissioner Meyer.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for doing this. You recommend we adopt some process that is measurable, accountable, and transparent going forward. Looking at other examples, what measurements would they use for something like that?
Well, let me preface that by saying if you're talking about adjustment to the compensation piece, I will give you my opinion about that. But I think what we've experienced at the park board in the past is that the decision-making process for compensation has been very political and kind of a finger in the air kind of a thing. Most other institutions that we looked at do something like tying it to, for instance, what the city's doing now for their inflationary compensation, and those are two different things. Adjusting the actual salary of the organization based on its duties and responsibilities versus simply an inflationary increase in your compensation. So I think most of the organizations that we look at least have some rationale for all of that. For instance, the city's is tied to collective bargaining agreements. Probably not a bad idea for you. We have a lot of the same situations that the city does with that. And within that, getting to the point where you approve that, like I said, the park board will probably have to go through its own process to approve that. But something that's inclusive of the community and is somewhat measurable when it comes time to do that, tied to other benchmarks. So, does that answer your question?
Okay, so the city ties it to collective bargaining agreements. Can you
Yeah,
expand on that? How does that work?
Say again.
Can you just expand on that? How does that work?
Well, the city's policy is, you should probably get that and look at it, but in essence, what the city does for inflationary adjustment is they tie it to the increases in the collective bargaining agreements from the previous year. So what they would do is and obviously they have a number of those, so I'm assuming they do an average, I'm assuming, if those collective bargaining agreements are different, but it's the increase in the collective bargaining agreements from the previous year.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Thank you, Commissioner Meyer. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, I would just thank you, President Nordyke, and your colleagues again. I think the report is incredibly prudent, and thank you for helping this board navigate some one of the most challenging topics that any elected board has to do. So much of what we do at the park board is by tradition, and tradition is not, it can be a wonderful thing, it's also a very messy thing sometimes, and tradition sometimes is problematic. But no elected body should be put in the position of putting their finger up in the air and say, I think I should earn this much. And
I agree with you.
And we have, again, we have a lot of, this board, I've said before, and I will say again, has a lot of pressing business before it. But I do also at the same time applaud every commissioner that brought this topic to the light of day. previous boards, through a tradition, have not had any public engagement process and have moved this forward on the floor at the last meeting of a year after a budget was already adopted. There were no costs identified for it, and it ended up being the first dollars that the park board was in the hole every year. So, so I applaud commissioners for bringing this to the light of day, and I think should you choose to accept some of these recommendations, I think President Nordyke had laid out some good next steps for any commissioners to work on. And thank you again for delivering your report in time for public comment for the adoption of our 2019 budget. Thank you again for your service.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. The time being 5:30, we will move into open time for the Minneapolis Park Board. Open time for the Park Board is a time where we receive public comment from the community on virtually any topic that they would like to bring to the board's attention. Before we start taking public testimony, I just want to just kind of go over some brief guidelines for folks about just the guidelines that we have for open time. Any individuals that would like to speak can do so by calling or contacting the Park Board before 3 p.m. on the day of the meeting and have their name placed on our open time list, and we only receive comment from people that have signed up to speak. Open time does not exceed a total of 15 minutes with time to be allocated by the president. I have 4 speakers. I will allocate 3 minutes apiece. During open time, public testimony is given without debate. Commissioners may ask a clarifying question, but we're not here to say you're wrong or I agree. Like, it's our time to listen. It's our time to listen to you. We do allow and encourage signs in our chambers. If you do have any signs that you'd like to display to make sure that commissioners can see them, we ask that you display them around the perimeter of the room, just to make sure that folks that may be behind you don't have their view of the meeting obstructed. We ask folks to remain seated until their name is called. There are only 2 types of items that are not appropriate to receive comment on during open time, and those are pending litigation and personnel issues. If you have, if you'd like to give the board comment on any of those issues, we ask that you do so by contacting commissioners or our executive staff individually, just out of respect for some of the sensitive information for our employees in the park board. We do not tolerate discriminatory and/or harassing words directed at anyone, so we ask that folks keep that in mind when they're making their comments. That said, my first speaker is Keith Olson. Keith, if you would come forward and state your name, and if you're comfortable, your address for the public record, and then Keith, you are followed by Constance Pepin.
President Bourn, Commissioners, good evening. My name is Keith Olson. I live at 4912 36th Avenue South. I've been here all my life. I'm an employee of the Park Board. I'm a vice president of the union. I run a business for 38 years, and I'm concerned about the proposed budget. I'm going to take back a little history. 2003, we had a multi-million-dollar deficit in the Park Board, and maintenance stepped up, took a 0% decrease, 0% contract for 3 years to help you out, and we got through it. Back then, we had 160 park keepers. Today, we're down to 96. That's a 39% decrease, and we were promised we would bring our numbers up to a better level at some point. We haven't been seeing it. Since then, some of the high points you've taken on is Lupien Water Park, Weber Pool, East Phillips, Phillips Community Center, and now soon to be Graco. Somebody's got to maintain these. We've got to increase our numbers to maintain them. We're hiring too many consultants. There's a lot of this stuff, like a consultant to look at roofs. Come on, a carpenter can do that. I can do that. I mean, we got to get away from it. We got a lot of qualified people in the park board that can do these jobs without consultants telling me my path is wore out. I'm in a building, I'm gonna tell you, I'm in Silby Park. I got a leaky roof, I got rattling windows, I got potholes all over. And in your budget, coming along, I don't know if it's delayed or not, we're gonna spend $973,000 to move a pool from where it's at to under the trees in the existing tennis court. That's $1 million. We can do better than that. We can spend our money. We can leave the pool where it's at. I see you want to reduce the replacement of vehicles. We got 16-year-old trucks sitting out there with duct tape on the fenders because of the rust is a hazard to getting cut on. This stuff's got to get replaced. This stuff's they're limping along. We can't reduce that budget. We seem to rely, I'm not totally on the total budget, but we seem to be relying an awful lot on MPP money. What happened to the rest of the budget, and how did we survive without that before? And we've got to get back to the basics of taking care of our buildings, our heating systems, our windows, our doors, our potholes, and our parking lots. I've got a pothole in my handicap parking space. Nobody to fix it. We don't need to spend $1 million on moving a pool, I say. It's time for more boots on the ground. We are at a breaking point, and I'm not begging for people. We're at a breaking point with all this new property and facilities that we keep taking on. Like PCC wasn't open a year ago. That's a 3-level building. It used to be a simple little building. That's 3 levels with 2 pools. We need help out there. We need more bodies to take care of our properties before we start spending our money otherwise. We got to get back to the basics here.
Thank you, Mr. Olson.
All right.
Our next speaker is Constance Pepin, followed by Reggie Jarrett. Constance, if you would state your name and if you're comfortable, your address for the public record.
Hi, Constance Pepin, 4031 Zenith Avenue South. And I'm going to try to squeeze in a couple of topics because there's 3 minutes tonight. First of all, a budget item. I understand the need to cut some costs. And looking at the budget attachment, that's public information, I see how you're trying to spread the pain around in terms of cuts to different areas of the park board. But one item in particular I think is causing totally unnecessary pain to a lot of people who love the Eloise Butler Wildflower Garden and Bird Sanctuary. The budget attachment suggests some ways to reduce the hours that the garden is open. But it's really hard when you look at that to think that the people who made those suggestions even understand how the garden operates. I've volunteered there for over 20 years, and I think I know how the garden operates. I'd like to think I do. And to save $7,178 by cutting naturalist hours, you don't have to reduce the time that the garden's open. That's not how it works. And most of the time that I volunteered there, the park police open up the gates at 7 and close them at dusk. And there's a lot of volunteers this year. The Friends of the Wildflower Garden contributed over 1,500 volunteer hours to keep the shelter open. And I have volunteered there many times when there's not a naturalist on staff. So I think things seem to me to have gotten confused. And now you're going to have a lot of people that are really upset that you're going to propose to cut the garden's hours. I don't know if all of you realize, but the garden is closed 5 months a year, every year, because of winter. And if you cut the garden's hours, it'll be closed more than half of the year. So please don't do that. And I have a letter that I'll leave with you that analyzes a little bit more the problems that I see with what's in the budget attachment. Now, moving on to water quality, I have a really excellent article that I'm going to leave with you, and it's called "We're in a Global Water Crisis. It's Time to Turn to Nature." And I know that several of you are very, very concerned about climate change, and I'm here to leave a copy of this article for you and to ask you to really consider the points that it's making. It's basically saying that conventional engineering is not going to get us out of this problem with freshwater ecosystem collapse. And so my request to you is that every time you look at a project, you consider the effect on the ecosystem. And you don't just look at that as an afterthought, which is happening now. And I'll give you an example. The Lopert Foundation is asking you to do a log rolling pond at Worth Park, which would really degrade the ecosystem over there. And you don't have to do that because you've got the river, which is where log rolling started in the first place, the Mississippi River, and we have Worth Lake and other lakes. So this would be a great way for you to push back and say, we're not going to further degrade the freshwater ecosystem by building something that doesn't need to be done because there are so many alternatives.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Pepin. Our next speaker is Reggie Jarrett, followed by Arlene Freed. Reggie, if you would state your name and if you're comfortable, your address for the public record.
Reggie Jarrett, 3517 Noble Avenue North. I don't want to beat up too much. You heard most of what Mr. Olson said, and I'm one of the park keepers. for the park board. I've been here for 28 years, and I've seen a lot of things up and down. And right now, we're breaking out there. We're breaking. You guys promised, or the board promised us something years ago, and as a union, we gave that up. We tried to help, and we're saying to you now, we need help. We have more jobs to do. We're picking up more land and we're making a better system, and we understand that we want to be the best system in the country, but at the same time, if we keep building, and the help is not going up with it, we can't keep up out there. We're trying to make things work, and we're trying to do it with what we have. We all try to be professionals. We all try to do that, but all the boots on the ground, and it's just not the maintenance department. We still think about forestry. We're thinking about recreation. We see this every single day. We're in buildings that are too cold. We have roofs that's leaking. We just still trying to do these things, but I don't want to beat it up too bad, but I came and I want to express to the board how bad we're really suffering out there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Jarrett. Our final speaker is Arlene Freed. Arlene, if you would state your name and if you're comfortable, your address for the public record.
Thanks for giving people the option, because that's fairly new. You didn't used to do that. Anyway, Arlene Freed, 1109 Xerxes Avenue South, and I am speaking to the salary issue. I didn't know that there was going to be a report tonight. Commissioners, recently the MPRB has issued a press release outlining an attempt to build a case for the Park Board Commissioners to receive raises by examining financial barriers to service. I would like to point out that there seems to be a misunderstanding regarding the Park Board Commissioners' remuneration. It is not considered a salary. The commissioners are not employed by the Park Board. They do get a stipend, and they do get health insurance. But previous to this recent election, no one on the Park Board has expressed the expectation that they would be provided a salary, and it is an unrealistic expectation. Generally, those individuals wanting to be on the Park Board have an interest in Minneapolis parks and therefore choose to serve on the Park Board. Being a Park Board Commissioner is considered public service. Commissioners are not employees. I urge you, the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board Commissioners, to focus on the business of the Park Board and put aside the unanticipated and inappropriate agenda item regarding what I call personal enrichment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Freed. That is all the speakers that I have signed up for open time. We are going into petitions and communications. I will start this week with Commissioner Vita.
I had a fun time on the bike ride this past week with a group of students from Pillsbury School. We toured a couple parks. It was fun. I thought Commissioner Meyer had beat me to it, but I found out at the bike ride that I'm the first park commissioner to ever go on the ride. A lot of firsts this week, right? So that was fun. It was pretty exciting. I've asked them to actually come and talk to the group about their rides and some of the things that they've noticed in a lot of parks that they frequent in Northeast Minneapolis in particular. So that was a good time. Also wanted to announce the focus sessions for the Hiawatha Master Plan. I believe tomorrow there's going to be one at the Lake Nokomis Community Center. There's going to be two tomorrow at Lake Nokomis Community Center. So if you have an opportunity to get over there, it starts at 6 o'clock. If you have an opportunity to get over there as commissioners or anyone in the audience, anyone who's interested in this, I would suggest maybe going over and stopping in tomorrow.
Thank you, Commissioner Vita. Commissioner Meyer.
Thank you. I was too busy door knocking every day for elections.
Kids don't want to hear that. No.
I was door knocking for their future. I also had a fun time at the ground breaking for the new amenities at the Sheridan Memorial Park. Really excited about those. A couple things about what I'm going to call the Pesticide Advisory Committee. Staff gave it a different name. They called it the Glyphosate and Integrated Pest Management Community and Technical Advisory Committee. So, yeah, it's a little bit cumbersome. So, we've had 20 applications so far. The original deadline was set for tomorrow by staff. I've requested to extend that deadline into next week. I personally wasn't able to get the word out as much as I wanted to, and concerned that it might have gotten lost in the election noise. So I've requested that it be extended till sometime next week to give people at least until the weekend to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Meyer. I may actually just ask a clarifying and follow-up question of colleagues, because you're bringing a timely question to the board during petitions and communications. I guess my question to my colleagues is there any reservation from anybody to extend the deadline for participation on the committee? So I'm seeing nobody express any objections. I guess my next question would be a parliamentary question, possibly to our secretary. Would we require any sort of resolution right now, or can that be done through a staff? Are staff empowered to make that change based on no reservations from the board? Secretary Ringgold.
President, helps if I have that. President Bourn, there would be no action needed by the board.
Okay. Commissioner Meyer, do you have a recommendation on what would be a prudent amount of time to extend that deadline by?
Yeah, so it was originally for the 8th. I did speak with Assistant Superintendent Barrick, and the deadline was not in the resolution or anything, so staff could just set it, and I suggested November 15th.
Okay. Is there any reservation from staff on November 15th or from commissioners? It looks like there's no reservation, so thank you, Commissioner Meyer, for bringing that forward. Moving on, Commissioner Cogill.
Well, I'll just say I had a great time on Monday evening at Whittier with Director Arvidsson and some consultants around the Southwest Service Area Master Planning process. It was a really great group of community members on a rainy night talking about the future of one quadrant of the parks in that service area, and some really great ideas and exciting ideas for planning the future of those parks, which haven't been planned for a really long time. So really excited to see what's coming next. There's another event tomorrow night in the Lowry Hill neighborhood, and we'll be doing design charrettes next week, so I'll certainly be there, and anybody who's interested should certainly come through for those events.
Thank you, Commissioner Cogill. Vice President Hassan.
Thank you, President Bourn. I had a great time at Stewart Park with the youth basketball team every Friday, and I also went to the Phillips indoor pool to see how things are going, and it looks like the community are enjoying, and there's a high need of lifeguards. If you guys know people that are interested in the community that also speak different language, it's something that we need. And I also want to share another meeting that Councilman Borsam is doing around youth and Cedar Riverside and the shootings that are happening around Branco, and how the community also asking help, and how the park board police can be more involved and how they can be more supportive. And let me get that. There's another meeting. I also invite my fellow colleagues, commissioners, to also join the second youth meeting, which will be happening on Saturday, November 10th at 5 p.m., 5 to 7 p.m. at Cedar Riverside Opportunity Center, which is across from Branco Center. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice President Hassan. Commissioner French.
I want to talk about a tour I took and a roundtable discussion I had with Governor-elect Tim Walz and Massachusetts Representative Joe Kennedy. He came here to talk about full-service community schools, and we walked around Richard Green, which is one of our sites that we have thinking about it as a full-service community school. It used to be a full-service community school in the past. I was really surprised about Tim Governor-elect Tim Walz's knowledge about how full-service community schools work and his commitment to actually wanting to expand that model. And Joe Kennedy, who's very, influential in Congress, wants to take this model back and make sure, maybe different areas of the country can receive grants from the federal government. So we here in Minnesota, Minneapolis particular, are kind of a spotlight for this new model. So I'm really pleased as punch that I got a chance to walk with those guys and tell them how I felt, and they got to see one of our schools that's connected to a park, we have about 19 of them. So that was kind of the highlight of my last couple weeks or so.
Thank you, Commissioner French. Commissioner Severson.
Thank you, President Bourn. I want to give loud congratulations to the 10U North Commons football team, as Superintendent Merrill mentioned earlier. They were the champions this year in the Bulldog Classic, which was created because we didn't have enough 10U teams. So I hope we can figure out a way to grow football. It's strong in North Minneapolis, but I'd like to see it in other parts of the cities as well. And continue that 12U champions at Creekview Park as well, and 14U champions at North Commons Park. So high congratulations to them. I hope they show up to one of our board meetings and we could take pictures and they can have that experience as well. I got to hand out candy at a wonderful event at Fowle Park. Travis Hegland did a great job. We did trunk or treating, so it's where we hand out candy out of the trunk in the parking lot, and there's like 20 different stations. So I did that half the time, and also Sarah Rossman at Weber Park. So for about an hour and a half, we got to, I probably ate more candy than I handed out, but kids were good with it. So that's what I wanted to share. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Severson. Commissioner Musich.
Thank you, President Bourn. I'd like to provide just a little bit more information about the focus sessions that are happening around the Hiawatha Golf Course Master Plan. There's 5 sessions that will be held, 4 of which are currently scheduled. The first 2 that are happening tomorrow night, beginning at 6 p.m., is a topic of about the environment. So talk about what you want to see in the environment, talk about what you're concerned about in the environment, et cetera. The second topic of the evening begins at 7 p.m., and that's a focus group for neighbors. So if you live around the space and you have concerns or hopes and dreams, this is the time to come and share them with the planners. The next 2 are being held on the 13th, and they are around golf. So the first one begins at 6 p.m. at the Hiawatha Clubhouse, and that's just golf in general. And then the second one, which begins at 7 p.m., is about African American history at Minneapolis golf courses in general, so not just Hiawatha, but all of our courses. So those are all the scheduled sessions, and then the next one is about Indigenous peoples' history in this region of the city, and we have not yet managed to get that scheduled, so when we do, I'll be sure to share that with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Musich. A few things. My first and probably most exciting one is to wish a happy 70th day of birth to Commissioner Forney. She has a very good excused absence for not being with us this evening. She is setting foot, I believe, on her 7th continent. She is either on her way or has her feet on Antarctica as we speak. So hope she's having a wonderful time. I want to thank Deb Pilger and Jeremy Barrick for hosting and co-hosting a meeting on milfoil around the chain of lakes with me at Lyndhurst Park, and to all of the neighbors that came out to that a couple of weeks back. Vice President Hassan and I attended, and Superintendent Merrill attended the grand opening of the Green Central Park Gym. And I wanted to just extend, we've done a lot of work there this year, and I wanted to extend a incredible note of gratitude to Commissioner Peter McLaughlin. Commissioner McLaughlin, through his advocacy for the Hennepin County Youth Sports Grants, really took an opportunity for to bring millions upon millions. I'm sure it's countable, but I don't know the number off the top of my head, but millions upon millions upon millions of dollars to the city of Minneapolis and our youth over the years through his advocacy for the creation of the sports grant projects, and then making sure that Minneapolis was a primary beneficiary of those grants throughout Hennepin County, and particularly in his east of 35W in the part of town that he represents. So he's done incredible work for the Minneapolis Park Board over the years, and we have, I think everybody owes Commissioner McLaughlin a debt of gratitude, and I think everybody is conscious that he has a very big set of shoes to fill. I think we are all very excited that and confident that Commissioner-elect Conley will be as big of a champion for our Minneapolis parks, and will fill those shoes as she steps into a trailblazing and historic role as the first African-American woman ever to be elected to the Hennepin County Board of Commissioners. So she made a very historic night. And there was a lot of history around the state and the country last night as well. When we first started on this board, we started with a largely new board, a new mayor, a new city council, and over the last several months we've been learning how to navigate those waters together. Now we are joined with a largely new metro delegation, a new governor, new balances of power at the legislature, new state constitutional officers. Virtually every piece of government that we deal with on a day-to-day basis is drastically different than it was not even 13 months ago. So I really applaud Superintendent Merrill and commissioners and staff that have navigated those waters with us and have helped us to build a incredibly successful year so far. I'll also say we're going into our first of budget meetings in just a few minutes, and I will say I think it's the value set of this board to hold the line or increase the number of people who work full-time in our parks and take care of our parks every single day, and increase programming for youth and seniors. And Chair Cogill and I have been meeting over the last few weeks with and consulting with our executive staff on developing a set of budget adjustments that we believe further reflects the values, interests, and priorities of this board and the community. And then our really big news over the last several months. Superintendent Merrill, Vice President Hassan, Commissioner Vita, KP companies, and members of our community have engaged in a nationwide search for our next superintendent of parks. We've gathered input from more than 20 listening sessions across the city, and we enlisted the help of community members to review candidates that had applied for the position, and ask those community members to bring their visions to us of what they feel are the best qualities for our next superintendent. Roughly speaking, the candidates were first reviewed and screened by our search firm, KP Companies. Highly qualified applicants there were advanced to a community review panel, and that panel conducted a blind screen of those applicants, so only seeing a professional summary of what those candidates brought to the table for the park board. That panel advanced several applicants to Vice President Hassan, Commissioner Vita, and me, and we completed a very similar blind screen. And the three of us had a shared interest in inviting 4 candidates who we felt could best advance the work of this park board. There was a 4th candidate on the list of names that I'll be announcing in a second. She withdrew her name from nomination. I think this entire board believes that our next superintendent needs to be an advocate for youth and families in our city that have so often been left on the margins, and after this nationwide search, we're pleased to forward these candidates for the entire board's consideration. In a field of competitive applicants from every corner of the nation, these three that we're forwarding stood out as being able to advance this board's mandate for increasing our investment in youth, advancing the mission of the park board, and building an even better park system for our guests and everyone who calls Minneapolis their home. That said, our top three finalists in alphabetical order are Alfred Bangora. Al is the recreation superintendent of Mecklenburg County in North Carolina and is a former recreational supervisor for the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board. Suvajit Ghosh is the director of the Louisville Park System in Kentucky. And brings an incredible amount of experience. He manages a very similar sized park system today. And our third candidate is Joseph Nick Williams. Folks will remember Nick Williams as the former Assistant Superintendent of Recreation for the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board. Nick is currently the Director of Parks and Recreation and Youth Development for the City of Oakland, California. Our next steps in our process for the selection of our next superintendent is we will be conducting interviews on November 13th. We are calling a special meeting to conduct our interviews. Those will be broadcasts live via Facebook Live. I think we are actually trying to get airtime on Community Access Network, but there is a conflict with the Planning Commission right now. So we're trying to, so at the very least, it will be broadcast on Facebook Live. Anybody's welcome to attend those interviews here. And then those interviews will also be posted online after the fact. We also want to welcome the entire community. We will have a meet and greet for our three finalists on the 13th. After they have finished their interviews with us, we will be hosting a reception in the downstairs open area of the Minneapolis Park Board headquarters from 7 to 8:30 p.m. The interviews will take place from 4 to 6:35 p.m. And so we welcome folks to join us for the interviews and the reception, or just one of them. So I just want to thank, we had an incredible pool of candidates from across the country. And I want to extend a thanks to everybody who applied to be the next superintendent of our parks. And I want to extend a thanks to Mr. Bangora, Ghosh, and Williams for agreeing to take this step forward with us and have their names be brought forward for this board's consideration. Seeing no further business, I would entertain a motion to adjourn. It's been moved. Is there a second? It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor of adjournment, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? We are adjourned.
The time being 6:05, I will call the Administration and Finance Committee to order. Would the Secretary please call the roll?
Commissioner Vita. Here. Commissioner Meyer.
Here.
Commissioner French.
Here.
Vice Chair Musich.
Here.
Chair Cogill.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you. I'd entertain a motion for approval of the agenda.
So moved.
All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? So moved. I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes of Wednesday, October the 17th, 2018.
So moved.
All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? So moved. We'll now move into the public comment period for the superintendent's recommended 2019 budget. I am assuming I don't have any sign-ups, but I will wait for a moment while Secretary Ringgold checks. And maybe just by show of hands, is there anybody who's interested in speaking tonight on the 2019 budget? Not seeing anybody. No, seeing none? Oh, one person, yes. Manuel, if you come to the podium and state your name and address for the record, that would be fantastic, and I'll give you 3 minutes.
My name is Emmanuel Ortiz. I reside at 2903 14th Avenue South. I'm here today because I served on the Urban Agriculture Activity Plan implementation team that reviewed or that worked with the Park Board to develop the community garden policy draft. And in that policy draft, we recommended a full-time position be created for the oversight of the community garden, the policy. And I noticed that in the budget, what is proposed is a half-time position or a part-time position. And I don't know if you all can speak to what the rationale was for reducing that to part-time at a time when this is a brand new and a large, significant project that will take a lot of planning and development that includes identifying and working with community garden leads at all of the various sites as this is initiated, coming up with really implementing all the components of the policy, including some of the racial equity pieces that were developed, and I think are really going to take a lot of time and attention to ensure that they're done well and correctly, to identify garden plots in the various sites, to work with the communities to make sure that they are equitably distributed, et cetera. At least in this first year, as this thing gets off the ground, I think it's a really significant position that can have a broad impact for communities. And that is a significant reason why we thought that this would be a full-time position. And I don't know if in deciding that it's only a part-time, if that's something that's reviewable to you all, if that's something that would be considered in a year. I'm curious to know what the rationale was from the board or from the superintendent perhaps as to the decision to make that a part-time position. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ortiz. Seeing no other commenters, I will move on to our action items. I'll take a motion on Resolution 2018-319.
Move Resolution 2018-319, a resolution approving Amendment Number 4 to License Agreement L304 with the State of Minnesota Department of Public Safety for office space for Minnesota State Patrol at MPRB Headquarters Building.
The resolution has been moved. Are there any questions from commissioners on this license agreement? Seeing none, all those in favor of Resolution 2018-319, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? So moved. So now I will move into the study item of our discussion on the superintendent's 2019 recommended budget. Director Wiseman, if you could just perhaps take us through the rest of this process before we dive into any questions or thoughts that commissioners have on the budget.
Good evening, Chair Cogill and Commissioners. First of all, you should all have in front of you on your dais the packet of commissioner questions and attachments. You should have also received this document yesterday electronically as well. This is a reminder to the public that any document that we provide to the commissioners, we also post on our public website, so that information is also available /budget. So just to go over the schedule for us once again, tonight we're having commissioner questions and comments on the superintendent's recommended budget. On November 14th, we're holding a committee of the whole meeting, which will be a work session for the commissioners to work on any proposed amendments to the recommended superintendent's budget, so that hopefully by November 28th, we'll be able to pass a budget resolution through the Administration and Finance Committee for the adopted budget for 2019. We will also have public comment on both November 14th and the 28th for the public to continue to provide input and comment on next year's budget. If everything goes as planned, we will then adopt our budget on December 15th at City Hall. There will also be a truth and taxation public hearing at that time. This is also a reminder to the commissioners that as you go through the documents that we provided you today and continue to have conversations, that if you have additional questions you would like to submit, we would like those submitted to the superintendent. For the November 14th Committee of the Whole session, we would need those questions to the superintendent by Friday morning to allow staff time to gather that information and provide responses before the next Wednesday. So this next one is a very short turnaround with our committee of whole meeting being just a week away. And then there would be another opportunity for questions before the November 28th meeting.
Thank you, Director Wiseman. At this time, I suppose I'll open it up to questions, comments, thoughts from commissioners. Commissioner Musich.
I have lots of opinions and thoughts I'd like to share about the budget, but I guess I'd like to hear what the proposed modifications to the budget would be before I get into things that you may have already addressed.
All right. I would say at this time, the modifications that would be what has been indicated by the questions that President Bourn and I submitted here. I don't think there's anything there aren't any proposed changes. Right now we have these questions and are reviewing what potential changes could happen based upon the responses from those questions. And I don't know if President Bourn has anything that he would like to add to that.
Thank you, Chair Cogill. I will say I have a few, I think that there are some aspirational goals out there of, on a large level, increasing the amount of funding that we have available through our Recreations Innovation Fund to really provide resources for youth, seniors, and girls, and really to pilot programming through different rec centers and bringing in different partners and be able to look at recreational amenities that we have not may have not always had the opportunities to look at in the past. I have a personal aspirational goal of there are some recommended reductions in regular FTEs in some divisions. I have some aspirational goals of restoring those cuts and possibly expanding the work of the frontline staff that take care of our parks every day.
Commissioner Musich.
Okay, so I think what I just heard you say, correct me if I'm wrong, is that you want to try to find a way to make cuts elsewhere in the budget to restore the positions that are being cut, that are frontline staff, so people out in the parks doing the work of maintaining and caring for them. Would that be an accurate assessment of what you just said, President Bourn?
President Bourn?
Thank you, Chair Cogill. I would like to find some ways to restore the recommended reductions in frontline staff to the budget. Those will have some cost implications in the budget, and we as a whole will have to figure out how to pay for those cost implications.
Okay, fantastic. You mentioned a Recreation Innovation Fund. Is that something that's in our current budget? Because I don't, it's not something I'm familiar with.
Yes, it is. A small. I'll let President Bourn answer. Sorry.
Thank you, Chair Cogill. In the budget packet that staff had prepared for budget adjustments, you'll notice in that packet, Assistant Superintendent Cox can probably get you the exact page, maybe after the meeting. But we have a program where all of our rec centers have access to what is called, I might be using the name, community leadership fund. Thank you. But it's effectively it's a fund that rec center directors have access to test out programs and projects that they otherwise would not be able to. It's a very small fund right now, and in the original recommended budget, I think there was actually a recommendation from staff to reduce that fund. And I think from some of the things that a lot of us have been hearing around our a desire to increase investment in youth, those are the types of innovative projects that we want to empower our rec service staff to be able to implement. But Assistant Superintendent Cox can probably, it's in the first packet of, there's a description of it in the first packet that the superintendent sent out, and Assistant Superintendent Cox provided a description of that fund.
Thank you, Chair Cogill. Commissioner Musich, the Leadership Fund is a micro grant opportunity for rec center rec specialists, rec directors, to apply for a small pot of money to encourage creativity and innovation. So it's an opportunity for them to try something without it detracting from their existing building budget. And so this is a way that we've used for many years, I'm not sure exactly how many, that promotes creativity, basically.
Okay. Thank you for the clarification. I appreciate it. So things I didn't hear in the aspirational goals of trying to modify the budget was nothing about trying to find a way to keep Eloise Butler open or the hours that it is now. It's, if you've never been there, you really need to go. The experience of being in Eloise Butler Wildflower Garden is equivalent to being in the Boundary Waters. It is equivalent to being on the Spear Hiking Trail. You have, in our city, an opportunity to have a wilderness experience and be exposed to plants that do not exist in the metropolitan area other than in that park. Some of my neighbors had never seen spring ephemerals before, ever. They had never had that opportunity because they did not have the opportunity to get out of the city, to get into the wilderness. And when I took them to Eloise and they had that opportunity to see those flowers, I know it seems like it shouldn't be a big deal because it's just plants, but it is the one way that people can experience the wilds of Minnesota without having to have the resources to get out of the city. So, aspirationally, I think we ought to be looking for a way to not cut access to Eloise. The other piece that I really think we need to rethink is the planting of trees. And grinding of stumps, which need to be done so that we can plant those trees. We are right now losing huge amounts of our urban canopy to disease, storms, and natural end of life. And those trees are our city's lungs. They are what's helping us combat climate change and its impacts to our city. And right now, the amount of trees we are planting is inadequate to replace that lost canopy. Instead of cutting tree plantings, we really ought to be finding ways to increase them. And that should be not just on our property, but encouraging private landowners to do the same. And I'm pretty sure we all care about climate change. We care about making sure that our city stays livable despite it. And cutting the amount of trees we plant is not helping us get there. So I'd love to see us restore funding for tree planting and stump removals as well. The other thing I'm not seeing, and I know we've talked about this ad nauseum at other budget planning meetings, is the desire to really expand the way people connect with each other and with our park system in terms of recreation. And I don't see a goal in the budget with measurable benchmarks towards getting to a place in our next budget cycle where we can make a bigger ask of the city council or the people that pay taxes into the system to increase and expand recreation services. So when we get into the nitty-gritty of hashing out changes, I think we ought to be considering inclusion of that goal. I know it's incredibly important to Commissioner Vita and Commissioner Forney. We've talked about it a lot, and I'd love to see us incorporate that aspirational goal in a physical way into the budget, so that next budget cycle we really have a plan, we understand the needs of our constituents, and we put it in place in a way that it's really transparent and open, and people feel like they understand what it is that they're going to be paying for. I had something else, but I forgot to write it down, so I'll let someone else talk for a while. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Musich. Commissioner French.
I guess I want to echo a little bit about President Bourn and Commissioner Musich's aspirations of making sure that the Eloise Butler Garden stays open. I think that's a pretty decent ask, and it's all about, I think this park board has asked for our working frontline workers to sacrifice a lot in the last 10 or 15 years, and I think we should make sure that we are paying that back. We're going to make sure that we take care of the workers who are making our parks look the way they do every day, and we get all these good awards from national organizations. We get those because we got folks out here who are making sure our trees are looking nice. We got folks out here making sure, the grass is cut and everything's looking nice. And I think we need to make sure that those people are taken care of. I think we need to make sure that those folks have more than just a part-time job at a garden. So let's make sure we make a commitment to the folks who have made a commitment to this place and making everything look beautiful and making it the way it looks. So that's all.
Thank you, Commissioner French. Commissioner Vita.
Thank you, Chair Cogill. I also want to look at ways that we can keep the flower garden open the way that it is, not closing it. I know we look at recreation as play sometimes, but this is great recreation. This is nature. This is, I've seen young people over there enjoying this just as much as I have adult flower lovers. And I mean, school will still be open in April, and this is a great opportunity for a field trip for kids. I think we could do a better job at getting more young people out to the garden so that they can have that experience in our parks, in our city. So I definitely want to look at those opportunities. Also, I want to make sure that we look at these jobs and keep our workforce strong for the parks. I heard the two staff that came and spoke, and just listening to them say that they helped us out years ago, and now they're just asking for a little support so we can maintain our #1 parks. I think that that means a lot to me that they took the time to come here to tell us that they need support from us, and we should look at every opportunity to support them in other departments as well. We all want recreation, but recreation is not the only department. We have to look at how people feel safe in our parks, and you can't have great recreation without safety. So I think we need to look at all departments and making sure that we keep them strong as they are and try to get even better. And then speaking of recreation, as Commissioner Musich said, I think we need to look at opportunities for the future in this budget. How do we have some measurable goals to take back to others and say, hey, look at what we did last year. Could you give us some more money in the future? So I think we really need to look at this budget and figure out how we do that, whether that's with our community survey we're planning to have. Can we ask some questions about recreation in that survey and figure out what people want in our city? We've done it for other things in the past, so I would really just like to take a look at those few things and figure out some measurable outcomes for sure for recreation. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Vita. Commissioner Meyer.
Thank you. Let's see. So I wanted to ask for clarification about something I brought up previously during a committee about having a comprehensive review of the climate change plan. Is that something that can fit within the existing supervisor's budget or superintendent's budget, or would we need to have a separate line item for that?
Superintendent Merrill?
Yes, if you were to add that, there would be a cost to that, and it would be in addition to, we'd either have to cut something. I mean, we'd have to cut something. That's because we don't have any more money, but yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Meyer. Commissioner Severson?
Thanks for recognizing me, and I am not on this committee. Appreciate it, Commissioner Cowgill. It is wonderful to hear all the commissioners on the same page about the Eloise Butler Garden. This is a great space that is located to many folks in the community that I represent. And one of my favorite things is watching the schools go down to the Eloise Garden Butler. And for some reason, we always get new teachers, and they cannot believe this wonderful space that we have. So I thank you so much for, I really didn't have to speak tonight because you folks are on it. But I do want to recognize and say, talk about the significance of our frontline staff and the importance of funding it at a level where they can be successful. They are kind of the heart and soul of our park board. They keep it operating. They keep the rain out. They keep the snow off the ground. They keep our roads plowed, and they are extremely important and a valuable asset to our community. But I also think it's important that we need to recognize that next time we need a higher levy. One thing I know is the city of Minneapolis residents love our parks. That's the reason that I wanted to be involved with it, and it's one of the reasons I ran to be a commissioner. People truly love our parks, and they're passionate about it. So I hope this conversation comes up when we start talking about that levy in the future, and make sure that we want to fund everything that's important and valuable to the residents of the city of Minneapolis.
Thank you, Commissioner Severson. Anybody else have questions or comments? Commissioner Musich.
Thank you, Chair Cowgill. I remembered my other question. It was about the intergovernmental relations position. We had asked how that job would be classified in our questions. It didn't get answered, but it sounds like from the equity assessment that's in the packet that it would be an appointed position. And I'm not sure what the employment rules are around appointed positions, but I don't know if there's any special rules around our ability to create those, if they need to be approved by the legislature or by the Charter Commission or anything like that, since we are essentially creating a political appointment on our staff. So if we could find out the legal ramifications of what we're doing and whether or not we can indeed do it, that would be very helpful.
Okay. Is there a response that maybe Council Rice could provide on that?
Yes, I think if I understand the question, does this deal with the intergovernmental relations person in the budget? Mr. Chair, Commissioner Musich, the legislature approved, I guess I'll digress for a minute. Under the city charters established, there were only really one appointed position that was outside of the civil service structure, and two positions at the park board outside of the civil structure was the superintendent and the secretary. Everyone else was civil service, rated, graded, established by civil service, tested, and hired. Then starting in the 1970s, there was a carve-out from the city charter on that, based largely on going to the legislature, and the legislature, we would go to the legislature and we created Mr. Schroeder's position, planning director, the chief of the police, the recreation head that Ms. Cox occupies now, and a couple other positions. As time went on, and I think there was about 6 to 8 at that point, and then that was added to on a number of levels through legislation, and then finally in about 1996 or 97, Senator Flynn was still in the legislature, and the legislature passed a law that basically left it to the superintendent to create any position outside of the classified service that he or she chose that met certain requirements. So it's a long way of answering your questions, but basically a position like this can be provided it's not in a collective bargaining agreement or doesn't interfere with it or falls within a certain range. And it's at a professional level that the superintendent can create those positions. And I'd have to defer to Ms. Brooks or somebody else from your Human Resources Department to enumerate the number of those individuals or positions. Perhaps the superintendent could answer that. But the long and short of the answer is that the superintendent has that ability to create positions like this.
Okay.
I would like our Human Resources Director, May Brooks, to come forward and just talk about our normal process that we go through in terms of establishing positions, and which is what we intend to do, would be to follow the normal process for the appointed class of employees. Just the normal, regular process that you've gone through whenever we've had any appointed positions that have been open for review.
Well, if we're going to talk about the creation of positions in general,
Yes.
Superintendent, is that correct?
Yes.
What we would start with is a general idea of what it is the job is to accomplish. Is that the road you want me to explain?
Yes.
All right, then. So what we look at is what the business need is, and then we talk about what it is that we're trying to get from the position. We research what different types of jobs there are. We try to create a job description that meets the needs of the organization as well as that hiring manager. And we try and figure out perhaps, what the salary is, and then within certain parameters, we will determine if the position should be an hourly position or a salary position, if it should be an appointed position. It will just depend, because there are rules that we should be looking at as far as determining if it's going to be in civil service, if it's going to be in a collective bargaining agreement, if it's going to be salaried or not, because there are federal laws to consider, So there are a number of factors before we get to the final product. Does that answer your question? Is that what you were after?
That's fine with me. I don't know if that answered your question, Stephanie, or Commissioner Usage.
I just would like to make sure that we're not doing something that we are not able to do legally. That's all. So if we're looking at things to cut, I feel like this position is probably one that we should be looking at. We do have a number of frontline positions that need funding before we start adding people to management.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Musich. Commissioner Hassan.
Thank you, Commissioner Vogel, and thank you, Council, for answering that question. I think it was a question that I think that could be asked outside of this board, and that could be, like research. I think we talked about this particular position over and over. I think we spend a lot of time, which we shouldn't, to my opinion, and I thank again for the clarification. I think we should also thank Mr. President Bourn for doing a great job and the work that we trusted him. I always knew, even outside of the park board, before I even got elected in this office, that Brad will be, someone that we can trust with, what we ask him to do. And people do complain, and I get it. Is when you take a lot of responsibility. I see how hard he's working right now, signing all this paperwork, and I think we know how this conversation started about the intergovernmental relationship. It was a need and ask that came from the board, not from the president, and not from a particular person. It came from the board that we're not doing a good job in terms of reaching out and getting money for the park board. And this was conversations that started from the legislative committee and that led into someone who's highly qualified, who's doing a great job so far in terms of keeping updating us what's happening, and even right now setting up with meetings with the new House of Representatives in the state. And as we know that there's a high need that we know that what the park board should be doing in terms of youth programs, and one of my biggest things that I wanted to see that's not happening right now, adult programs for seniors who are not able to use in our park system that will love. And I'm always getting, every meeting that I go to, they ask me, I have the Brinkle next to me, but I can't use it. I have Phillips Community, but I can't, there's nothing happening. And I think, as we heard from the park keepers that came in before us and testified that there's a high need, and I agree, with the park board is growing, we have to hire more people to do the job. And with 38% decrease, that's a lot from 2003 to 2018 that we're in right now. We could do better, and I just want to thank Mr. President for all the hard work and for such a long, it was a tough year, being new commissioners, and with a new superintendent that's highly qualified, that's doing her job, and that's keeping up with everything that's happening. And whether it's doing the conversation with the community about how the park police should be happening, and I also want to thank Jason for leading and for listening. It was a tough conversation that are happening, and I think that I also I haven't seen most of the commissioners to be also involved in those meetings and to be involved about what's happening instead of focusing on specific positions or things that are not that particular, that's not interested to the issue that we're talking about. And thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Hassan. Commissioner French.
I guess I had just a question. I don't know if this is for Secretary Ringo or Councilor Rice, but has there been a comparable position, not necessarily the job description, but has there been a comparable hire previous to this board of the superintendent decided that she wants somebody to do a particular job who has particular professional skills to do that job, and that having to go through this board to have that person hired? Are we setting precedence here, or?
Secretary Ringgold?
President Bourn, Commissioner French, are you indicating the creation of a new job position or the actual hiring of a specific individual?
I'm asking about the process. The process right now is being questioned if it's above board or not. Mm. So what I want to know is, has process similar to this right here, where the superintendent is taking direction from the board, has that happened in previous boards? Not necessarily that position, but any position where the superintendent decides to hire somebody?
President Bourn, Commissioner French, what I can say is that in my experience, the superintendent has had the discretion in terms of which positions they identify as appointed and which positions they identified as civil service. And there are times when those things have changed over time based on the viewpoint of the superintendent, and I'm assuming the viewpoint of the board that that individual is serving.
Okay, thank you. With that being said, I don't think we're like reinventing the wheel right here. I think we're doing something that the board is, the majority of the board has decided this is best for the board, and I think the person that's in that job right now is doing a great job. He's well qualified and he's got connections throughout the city, and I want to make sure that we can just end this conversation about that position. Okay, all right, that's fine.
Thank you, Commissioner French. Superintendent Merrill. I'm so sorry.
I just wanted to respond maybe a little bit more. This position that we're talking about is one that I think would be an appointed position, but it would be posted, it would be open to the general public, applications would be received and evaluated, and so that would be the normal process that we would go through in terms of hiring. So I think you made a great statement, Commissioner French. However, the current person who is our consultant isn't necessarily the person who would end up getting the job. He would have to compete if he was interested with whoever would come forward to apply. So that's the process.
Thank you, Superintendent Merrill. Seeing no other lights on, I'll just say a couple of things. Want to, first of all, thank staff and the really hard work in putting forward the budget in the first place, and also being responsive to the questions that I submitted and other commissioners submitted. It's certainly at this point, with the levy that we got, now down to brass tacks, and we need to, I think, from my perspective, and I think from the whole board's perspective, given what our priorities are, we need to show them in what we're investing in, and that's number one, investing in youth. I'm going back to our board priorities, and I think I've said this at a couple of other occasions, but seeing that youth investment is a major priority based upon the dollars that we spend in the general fund is really important to me. I think it's there, but I would like to see it more clearly enumerated. I also I think the other thing I'd like to say is that, overall, I think the budget's on the right path, and I'm really hopeful that the indications that we've given that we want to invest in youth, and that we also really prioritize our frontline staff will go forward and help us in getting additional funding next year and in the coming years to continue to expand on those central board priorities. And I see two more lights on now. We have President Bourn.
Thank you, Chair Cogill. Just a couple of reminders for folks. I heard Commissioner Meyer, for example, ask if something was in the recommended budget. When we submit our next budget rounds, if there's something that is not, and the answer that I heard to that was no, that was not in the recommended budget. So I think if there are things that commissioners would like to see in recommended budget, there's a very short turnaround for staff to start building cost projections, so commissioners can have that information at their disposal when they're looking at making decisions around the budget. And there are just a couple of, going through the commissioner questions and responses, there are sometimes questions that are not explicitly answered. There's background information provided, and I'm just wondering if that is, there's a couple of examples where there's a question that says prioritize between A and B, staff's recommendation of prioritization between A and B. And the response to that was a description of A and B and not a recommended prioritization. So I guess process-wise, should those questions just be resubmitted, or and I'm not looking for any particular answers right now, but I'm getting a nod from Director Wiseman that if folks don't have the information that they need to based on the preliminary response, that those questions can be resubmitted if there's more information that you're looking for around there. Thank you.
Thank you, President Bourn. Commissioner Meyer.
Thank you. I just wanted to correct a couple things. The new IDR position didn't go through committee, so the legislative committee didn't have anything to do with that. That was a superintendent decision. And the board hasn't taken a vote, so it doesn't reflect the position of the board. It's not something that I've entirely made up my mind about, so I don't want to end the conversation. I think it's very much a conversation worth having about whether we expand this position in a full-time way. At the previous committee of the whole meeting, I said, my view was we should have a longer test of it, and I think the real test of it will be in the spring with the legislative session, with things like the lobby day, and we have to think about, and I also said, we needed to wait until we had election results to see what things looked like, to see how much value it would have. As President Bourn mentioned earlier, there are a lot of new people, so there are a lot of new relationships that need to be built. So I think that would argue in that direction. But I just wanted to correct those two things because I think it's still very much a dialogue worth having.
Thank you, Commissioner Meyer. Upon review, I do have, I think, one more question since folks have been, a few commissioners brought up Eloise Butler. I was wondering if somebody from staff could clarify what the impacts are going to be with the upcoming potential reduction in funding around hours and season. Is there somebody who could? Deb?
Good evening, Commissioners. So, yes, there are a few options on the table if this budget reduction is approved by the board. We currently are slated to run the Eloise Butler Wildflower Garden beginning April 1st and then running through October 15th, 7 days a week. And then we shift to weekends in mid-October and weekends only. So we have a few options. We could potentially start the opening date later, shift from April 1st to later in the month, which has actually been our reality for several years because of snow and mud on the trails. It's a difficult site to get into in the spring. We've had some fabulous springs where people have been able to get into, but where it is with the sun angles and snow and mud, that can be difficult. We could also look at possibly closing on Mondays for part of the season or some of the shoulder seasons. That is a common practice for different types of botanical gardens or museums or kind of things in that realm. So it hasn't been completely decided. We thought also we'd like to speak with a friend some about patterns and what they see and how we could really maximize the hours that are open to get the most people in and the most school children in and those things.
Thank you. Commissioner Musich.
I would just like to note that we did receive a really detailed letter from the Friends, which I'll forward to you, and that it will be included in P's and C's for our next regularly scheduled meeting on the 20-something. I forget the exact date. But
14th, November 14th?
No, the next one after that, because that's a special one. But anyway, it'll be there. They submitted a letter to us. It gets into a lot of detail about why we really shouldn't touch any of the cuts that are proposed potentially in the budget. So I'll share that with you, so you can kind of see what they're hoping to see us do, which is actually expand the access and opportunities to engage with this space. So I'll forward that to you.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. That's very helpful. I think with that, I will end our budget discussion. That also marks the end of the Administration and Finance Committee. All those in favor of adjournment, please signify by saying aye. Oh, I'd like a motion to adjourn. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We are adjourned. Moving right along, I'll call the Planning Committee to order, time being 6:48. Would the Secretary please call the roll?
Commissioner French. Here. Commissioner Severson. Here. Commissioner Meyer.
Here.
Vice Chair Cogill.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you. I'd entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Okay, yes. Well, actually, could I first maybe make a potential amendment to the agenda, moving the study report item between items 4.1 and 4.2 per the recommendation of staff. It might help us get a little bit more context regarding this second resolution. So if that could be the intended motion.
Are you, okay, so you're asking for it to be 4.1, 5.1, 4.2?
Correct.
The order?
Yes.
Okay,
yeah.
I would.
How do you feel about that?
I support that.
Okay. Is that okay with you, Commissioner French? All right, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? So moved. I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes of Wednesday, October the 3rd, 2018.
So moved.
All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. I'll entertain a motion on Resolution 2018-320.
Move Resolution 2018-320, a resolution approving an encroachment permit for use of 66.6 square feet of land in front of the subject property at 4893 East Lake Parkway. I'll end it there.
The resolution has been moved. Are there any questions from commissioners on this resolution? Seeing none, all those in favor of Resolution 2018-320, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? The resolution carries. Director Arvidsson?
Just buttoned my jacket incorrectly. Let me try that again. Commissioner Cogill, commissioners, thanks for the time, and thank you, Chair Cogill, for the switch. I think it'll be easier to understand the second action item that you have after this brief presentation. Commissioners, what I'd like to talk about tonight is a brief update on parkland acquisition, and specifically to talk about parkland acquisition that is not river related. We certainly do spend a lot of time talking about Above the Falls, being the core acquisition area, which has really been driven by the River First action. However, the 2020 comprehensive plan also did identify some general neighborhood search areas where we might have some gaps in our system. You know, we sort of famously talk about how there are, 97% of the city that's within a 10-minute walk of a park, and that other 4%, 3% is somewhat concentrated by the river, but there are also other pockets. The service area master plans, as some of you know, are refining and narrowing those search areas based on community engagement, and sometimes getting pretty specific about things we want to look at in terms of increasing our park holdings so that they can best benefit the public. We've gotten to a point where there's actually quite a few discussions that have advanced on some of these particular properties, and they may make acquisition possible soon through a variety of different methods. So I just wanted to go through a few of these tonight and talk about them, again, just sort of in terms of discussion and update. In the planning that we've been doing, there's been some acquisitions that have been envisioned under different policy direction by the Park Board. Obviously, we know Above the Falls / River First very well in the Upper River, and we've done some acquisitions in that area. A couple of the others is that there's a series of parks in the North Loop, which is a neighborhood that has not had neighborhood parks ever, and then a search area near 15th Avenue, also downtown, that are called for in the Downtown Service Area Master Plan. Two kind of areas, or a zone as it were, is also called for in the South Service Area, specifically the Midtown Greenway corridor and the Hiawatha Avenue and Lake Street intersection. And so two pieces that have started to come forward there is something right at Hiawatha and Lake, which is a highly active transit-oriented center, as well as the Hennepin County's CPRO site, which is immediately adjacent to the Greenway. One thing that's coming out of the North Service Area recommendations, which are going to come before you for final consideration for approval right after the first of the year when we're done with the budget, is an extension to one small triangle that we actually have called the Russell Triangle Extension. And then a couple other pieces coming out of that plan is a different routing for the Loose Line Rail Corridor, as well as a connection through what's called the Anwatan Woods of Bryn Mawr, which would create an additional loop within and then beyond Worth Park. And then just very recently, kind of hot off the presses, it's not even out for public comment yet, but you did authorize the public comment period, is that the east of the River CAC is recommending some more specificity around the missing link of the Grand Rounds, as well as a search area in the southeast Como. We're also in the midst of the Southwest Service Area Master Plan, which may identify some additional park gaps or needs. I'm not going to go through every one of these tonight, but I do want to talk about 5 highlighted ones where we're actually fairly close to some potential agreements that may come to you in the coming months. So I'm going to highlight these pretty high level and then obviously open up for questions if you have them. The North Loop parks are one of the more complicated pieces of this whole puzzle, and the reason why I asked that this presentation perhaps take place before the next action item is that the very next action item you'll consider is actually for one of these North Loop Park pieces. So there's the graphic that you see there was the adopted master plan for the downtown or North Loop parks as part of the downtown service area master plan. And there's a couple of pieces of this. The United Properties site, which is now highlighted here in green, is also known as the Nordic. It's right next to the Free House downtown. The board has approved a land in lieu option by the board, so there will be a public park plaza in that location, accomplished through park dedication requirements. The River Loop site is right up here next to West River Parkway, and this is the one where there is an action before you tonight. The Schaefer-Richardson site, which was envisioned as the actual North Loop Park, kind of the node space where people could actually play. We are doing ongoing negotiations with the developer there around acquisition, and I think we're very close to a purchase agreement that we may bring before you again within the next couple of months. And then much more recently, a site here called the Tractor Works site. We've had initial conversations with a developer about a collaborative project that's not related to park dedication, but would involve quite a bit of philanthropy on their part. So you can see as these pieces start to fall into place, this, what is known as the 8th Avenue streamscape, we're actually beginning to really create that linkage that was envisioned in fairly rapid order. The Downtown Service Area Master Plan was only adopted about 1.5 years, 2 years ago. So those are some pieces in the North Loop parks that are beginning to come together. For each of these, I want to talk about what are kind of the different mechanisms that we're using and then what we may ask of you going forward. So in the North Loop, we're able to use park dedication perhaps more effectively than in other places in town. There's a lot of development happening, which generates a lot of funding. It also generates the opportunity to have land in lieu or land dedication happen, which is not necessarily true in other parts of town. So the park dedication land in lieu has been completed for the Nordic, and it's under consideration tonight, as I've mentioned, for River Loop. There may be a sort of an outright purchase agreement for the Schaefer-Richardson owned North Loop Park site, which has actually been negotiated for some time in the context of park dedication requirements. And if we come to an agreement with them and bring something forward to you, I'll go into more detail on that. But that's park dedication related, but would be a different mechanism. A collaborative implementation agreement that would be both public and private money at the Tractor Works site. And then the potential expenditure of park dedication funds to support some of the acquisition and implementation within your CIP budget approval. There's currently about $1.3 million available in park dedication funds in the North Loop, with more coming. So this is an area where we're actually really able to reinvest and can do so rather quickly. Both the Lake and Hiawatha location and the CPRO site, which I've put stars on this map here. Both of these are within search areas that are identified in the South Service Area Master Plan. So what you see there is a page from that master plan which identifies those two corridors. It happens to be Action 12. So we've been able to kind of move forward collaboratively in both cases with the county. So I'll start with Lake and Hiawatha. Many of you might be familiar with this site. Hiawatha and Lake, it's a big intersection. It's a split level. The light rail is there. There's a two-level station. It's seen some significant redevelopment over the past 3 or 4 years. The southern quadrant of Lake Street, west of Hiawatha, west of the light rail, is county-owned property that they have recently redeveloped into a mix of housing and public service. It's adjacent to LRT, and it's also home to the Midtown Farmers Market. Recently, we were approached as they consider their Phase 2 development, which will include some private housing development, which requires a park dedication option. The county itself would not have that required of them, but because it's a public-private partnership, I believe it does. This is the vision for that, and this area here called the Market Plaza, which is where the farmers market takes place, is also being considered adjacent to the transit and everything as a possible park plaza space that would be new to our system. And here's a basic rendering of that that would accommodate both park-like uses and then also the market when that's in session. Assistant Superintendent Schroeder has been more involved in this particular project, and he can answer questions on that if you have them at the end of the presentation. The way that this might work, again, any of this we would sort of bring before you for final approval, clearly, is that the parkland dedication would actually satisfy the private developments requirement through a land in lieu option with board approval. We would continue to engage with the Corcoran neighborhood in Hennepin County on final design. And then this project would actually also need to amend the South Service Area Master Plan so that we have an adopted concept going forward. Similarly is the CPRO site, which is a little bit further west. This is a picture of the CPRO site from the Midtown Greenway. It's a county-owned site. It was acquired when they were constructing the Midtown Greenway. They essentially had to buy out some grain elevators here that were the last rail customer on the Midtown Greenway. And so the county ended up with this site that is very park-like. It is actually the only fully accessible access into the Greenway Trench. You can see the pathways on this picture. Those have a fully, it's easily bikeable, but also fully accessible slope. The county has implemented phase 1 improvements. There's some seating there. Some trees have been planted, native landscaping. You can see some of these seating areas have been preserved as sort of the foundations of that. It's a nice project. We worked with the county to sort of flesh out a full concept, and the county board actually, almost a year ago now, it's been a bit of a lag, but the county board actually approved a no-cost transfer to the park board, as well as a $300,000 grant to us to implement phase 2. So this is something that obviously could be a real benefit. And we've been working through kind of some internal conversations about how that might happen. So this is the general concept going forward. Again, it's at the concept level of our service area master plans. We would envision an actual performance stage here, kind of an adventure play, hillside, some urban agriculture. These are all amenities that don't exist in the two nearby parks, Stewart and Powderhorn. And so it would bring an additional amenity to that Midtown Phillips neighborhood, as well as giving us great exposure to the Greenway. So the mechanism here is that there would potentially be a cooperative agreement for land transfer that we would bring before you, as well as an acceptance of that grant, and again, an amendment to the South Service Area Master Plan. Russell Triangle is on the north side. It sits in an area that is bounded by Golden Valley Road and Broadway, both of which are wide road barriers, and it's in that area does not have any kind of major neighborhood park or playground. So the Russell Triangle property, as you can see here, is this tiny little piece right here. But across the street, there are several vacant lots which have remained vacant for some time. Right now, CenterPoint Energy is constructing a small above-ground facility on a portion of these properties. And the city, in discussions they've had with me, is pretty willing to consider transfer of the rest of it so that we can place a playground facility on that property. And actually, the triangle at its scale is relatively useless as an active parkland, but that additional land across McNair could be an exciting opportunity and one that the community and the CAC on the north side supported. So the mechanism there is that we're coordinating with some of the final design with CenterPoint and with the city. And then we need to probably modify the design slightly in the North Service Area final document, and then looking for a land transfer. The city has also suggested, we could explore some street closures to get even more land in that area for a contiguous green space and playground. The Loose Line Regional Trail is the last one I'll talk about today. So the Loose Line Regional Trail right now, the route is very difficult to follow. On this map, it's this lighter red, and so you come in from the west, and you have to jog down this way and through Worth Park. You actually have to get up onto Glenwood Avenue on street, and then back down in through the park, and then onto Cedar Lake Avenue. It was an important, very important corridor, important linkage that was never able to be totally smoothed out because there are a lot of rail corridors in the area, but they weren't available. But that has changed. The North Service Area Master Plan process is identifying a new route, which is the bright red line, which actually sits on the CP rail line, running through Worth Park and Bassett Creek Valley, which is now abandoned and available for sale. What's interesting about this property as it runs through the West Metro here on this red line is that there are several different owners that are interested in different pieces of this rail line. There's pieces of it that we can really use. There's pieces of it that developers can really use. There's pieces of it the city can use, Metro Transit actually, and even potentially way out west Breck School as a connection between the two pieces of their campus. So what's intriguing about this opportunity, and this is maybe more complex than the others I've shown you, is that we have already done a parcel by parcel railroad appraisal of the corridor. And the rail, we've also heard, really wants to have one buyer to deal with for the entire corridor. And it's possible that we might think of acting as a lead buyer in collaboration with these other agencies in order to make sure that everybody kind of gets what they want at an appropriate price. This could be eligible for regional funds if we are able to update the loose line trail routing. So the next steps in terms of all of this, there's no action tonight except one maybe about to come, is that we're going to continue to work with partners on acquisition under the different policy directions that you've given us through the master planning and the comprehensive plan. We are bringing forward this evening one of these agreements that I've mentioned that fills in one of these puzzle pieces in our system. And then we do expect to bring forward several others that are on the cusp of finalization in the next 1 to 2 months. Specifically, the CPRO site, an acquisition agreement potentially there, a Hiawatha and Lake Land in Lieu agreement, and then possibly a purchase agreement for a North Loop Park, which would be exciting because there hasn't been one. So we think in the next couple months we're probably closing on some of the deals there and can bring forward some real action to you. I'm going to put this map up just as a way to have the discussion. I'm happy to answer any questions, as is Assistant Superintendent Schroeder. And thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Arvidsson. Are there, Mr. Severson?
Adam,
Commissioner Severson, sorry.
this is really good news. The North Loop has been yearning, you probably know more than I do, yearning for a park for a long time. And Rice Park is absolutely packed in the summertime, where kids actually wait in line to get on the tot lot equipment. So this is awesome. I can't wait for the North Loop to be involved and engaged more on this, and I can't wait to share the news. Good work.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Severson. See no other questions. I had a couple of questions regarding the agreements that are coming forward, you know, when you're, for example, with the North Loop, but also a couple of the other examples that were provided, where you're working with developers on new projects and getting land in lieu. Are those all exclusively agreements that are ending up being public land that we have a land transfer agreement, or are some of them easements? Is it a hodgepodge? What do you have?
Chair Cogill, it is probably accurately described as a hodgepodge. We try to get fully public and ideally permanent access to land in whatever way is appropriate for the situation. Okay. So with the Nordic, for instance, that is a permanent easement over private property. The developer there is building the plaza there. We have been involved in the design. They will remain the underlying landowner, but we have a perpetual easement that makes that park fully open to the public for any use that would be allowed in a public park during the normal operating hours of a public park. So, and anything that would be banned normally in a public park would be banned there as well. So those standard policies are enforced. The Schaefer-Richardson North Loop Park site is actually likely to be a straight-up acquisition, which means we will own the land. And in other cases, you know, there may be some kind of a hybrid. The Tractor Works site we have just begun discussing. They do not have a park dedication requirement because they are an existing property. They're interested in creating something that's great for their users as well as ours. And so exactly what form that will take, I think there's a little more negotiation around, hence the hodgepodge.
Great. And I guess you probably answered this question, but to be clear, with park dedication, it is project by project. You can negotiate any kind of arrangement with the land. It doesn't have to be, if it's land in lieu, it doesn't have to be suddenly public land, like publicly owned land necessarily.
Commissioner Cogill, under park dedication, there's essentially, think of it as a three-tiered process in order. The first tier is that developers are essentially required to give us land. And there's a formula for that. Yeah. Usually in the North Loop, it adds up to like it's a maximum of 10% of their land. And so they deed that land to us. They do not pay a fee. That's their dedication. And then the land is just ours. Doesn't obviously come with any construction. We would have to build. We would have to maintain. We would have to supervise all of that. The second stage is if we don't want land, say it's not within our master planning area, or it's not in the right spot, or it would be redundant, we can allow the developers essentially to pay a fee. And that happens most of the time when it's not practical for us or for them to do land. And then the third piece is this land in lieu, which means that a developer may be deeding an easement over private land. It's also known as private land reserved for public use. And in that case, typically a developer is constructing improvements on the land. Often they are maintaining that area, and then they provide us a perpetual easement over that. And the benefit is that it's the benefit to us, obviously, is that we get a constructed piece of our park system. The benefit often to the developer is that if there is some infrastructure that they may have been interested in building anyways, and that also meets a park purpose, then they can get some benefit from that without having to pay the cash right off the top.
What would be an example of that?
The example of that is the one that you're going to see next. So, and the Nordic, which is the development that's going in right next to the Free House on Washington, that is also a land in lieu project. It gives us a connection between Washington and the next block over, so it breaks the super block. We'll have a public plaza space there, including curling in winter, that we get to jointly program with the developer and provide a lot of a new kind of outdoor plaza park style amenity to the North Loop. And then that will be built. We will not have to invest any infrastructure money in that. And it will also be maintained by the developer.
So 2 more questions. One, on the maintenance piece, per kind of our budget discussion tonight, how common is it with these easement agreements that the developer is the one maintaining the space?
Commissioner Cogill, almost all of the time.
Okay. And my last question is on loose line. Maybe I missed it, but I think you mentioned that the proposed route is amended from previous guidance. Is that accurate? Could you recap that?
Yeah, so there, and I may, for the history of this route, Commissioner Cogill, I may actually defer to Secretary Ringgold, who is involved in the initial creation of the current route of the loose line. This is a regional trail. It's considered a regional facility and can get regional money. And the existing routing has long been considered important to get people from place A to place B, but not exactly the character of a regional trail, because there simply weren't the connections available at the time. And so the North Service Area Master Plan, that process is actually proposing to revise the routing, the official routing of the regional trail. Great to add.
I would concur.
Oh, thank you. I think those are all my questions. Commissioner Severson, you have another question? Oh. With that, I think we'll move on to Resolution 2018-321. If I could get a motion.
I'll move Resolution 2018-321, a resolution approving the creation of a parkland development and easement agreement with Opus Development.
All right, take it away.
Okay. Commissioner Cogill, Commissioners, again, we'll just roll right into this one. You've heard a little bit about the River Loop project. Essentially, Opus Development Company and River Loop Joint Venture LLC have purchased a portion of the Star Tribune site, which is at West River Parkway and Plymouth Avenue, just down the street from here. They're proposing a 218-unit housing development on that site. The development is actually adjacent to the planned connection between the proposed 8th Avenue streamscape and West River Parkway. It's a real critical connection. It's how you get to the Parkway and Central Mississippi Regional Park from the North Loop. The developer basically called us up the day that they had the purchase agreement and said they wanted to work with us on this. It's been really exciting to do so. We've worked with them to design an appropriate connection across the property and across the Parkway. And this is a proposal to then that they will provide a permanent public easement in lieu of their park dedication fees. So where we're sitting here, you've seen this map a moment ago. I'm highlighting in red the location here of the potential easement, roughly speaking. The development site is actually right up here on this land adjacent to the Parkway. And you can see how that connects even without the rest of the North Loop streamscape, even without the rest of it. This would still be critical because this gets you to the public street network from the Parkway system, which we really don't have those connections in the North Loop. at all. This is a rendering of their basic site plan. It's included in your packets. You can see how the development sits here on the edge of the property. Access is actually from Plymouth and from behind along 8th. There's no access proposed out onto the parkway. The area that's shaded in this orangish color would be the easement area. So the developer did purchase this portion of the private extension of 8th, which is going to serve as their access, but will also provide the bicycle connection now, and then additional trails being built through the green space, and then a crossing at West River Parkway, and then we have trails on the opposite side. The proposal details basically is that their expected fee, if they were to pay a fee, would be roughly $337,000. The easement acreage is about 1/2 of an acre in total. One of the requirements is that the value of what they contribute in land and improvements has to at least equal the amount of the fee they would have paid. Here, the value of that land and the improvements that they will make far exceeds the easement, or far exceeds the expected fee requirement. They're looking at about a $1.5 million investment. And there's no encroachment request for parkway access. The big benefits of this proposal is that, as I've said, this is a critical link between the North Loop neighborhood and the Mississippi River. I think it's an opportunity that's not to be missed. It probably won't come around again in the near term. It implements the 8th Avenue streamscape. And it does so, they're going to build out this project and build out these pathways along with their development. So we're not just getting right to land that we have to build on in the future. It will be actually a fully completed connection by the time the new homes are available. And that's all I have on that. I'm happy to answer questions. We also have several members of the development and design team here in the office, in the boardroom, if you'd like to ask them questions also.
Thank you. Commissioner Severson.
Is that James?
Commissioner Severson, yes. Oh, is that a question for me or for?
All right. Thank you, Commissioner Severson. Would the development team like to say a few words, or be happy to have Ms. Camp?
Good evening, Commissioners. I'm Gretchen Camp from ESG. As Adam mentioned, we've been working on this for many months now, maybe over a year, and we're really excited about it. I don't know if in your packet, is there an overhead?
No.
There is? Okay. I actually have that. Oh, okay, great. I didn't see any color. Yep. Just something a little bit. I've got the back up here. Right, thank you. I'll just mention that we're working with Damon Farber on this, and Jesse is here from Damon Farber, and Luke is here from Opus if you have more cost questions, but Jesse can talk about the design too. So right now, if you go out to the site, there's basically a pedestrian trail there now where people cut through the site to get to the river, and so it's really a natural spot for it, and we're just excited to be making this happen. Main entrance to our building will be here. So a lot of activity, a lot of common areas and amenities of the project are here. So a lot of eyes on this area. So as you come up, there's a grade change here. So we'll be working with some retaining walls to create kind of a separation between bike and pedestrian. And then we're going to be working with, we hope to be working with staff to create a connection across. Also looking at maybe a flashing light or a crosswalk. Actually, I'm forgetting the name for that, but similar to where at the Federal Reserve where you can press a button and cross, something similar for pedestrian safety. So if you have specific questions, either about the costs or the details of the design, let us know. We're all here to answer questions, and we're really excited about the project.
Thank you very much. And do commissioners have questions? Commissioner Severson?
How do you foresee the parking lot across the street? Is that going to be taken up by the space of you guys building this property?
Commissioner Severson, Maybe Adam can address it. We've had real just brief discussions about essentially improving the parking lot, just because I know that a lot of the residents from here, that'll be their main way into the park system, and just making that a little bit more visually appealing. But I don't think that's actually part of what we're doing tonight, but it might just be an added bonus, if you will. Adam, do you want to add anything to that? But we're not really impacting the parking lot in any way.
Chair Cogill, Commissioner Severson, the clarification of your question, were you worried about impacts to the parking lot in terms of it being replaced or it being used by residents?
Being used by residents that are living in that new property.
Commissioner Severson, we will have all of our parking below grade, more than one space per unit, and we also have visitor parking there as well. And I don't know if we have a zoomed out version, but we also have, we're actually creating a new private drive that will have parking on it as well. So I don't think that will be an issue.
Great, thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Severson. Commissioner French?
I guess I'll turn that on. I want to know what our rents are going to be like in this building, and is there going to be anything for affordable housing in these buildings, any affordable housing units or below market costs?
Currently, Commissioner French, currently in the proposal, this project is market rate without affordable units. And just to talk specifically, Luke, I don't know if you want to talk about rents, but I think, I don't have, do you want to talk a little bit about rent? It's market rate rents.
We don't have a gauge right now, just market rate. Is that what
Correct.
Done. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. No, all right. Well, I'll just say thank you very much. This is very exciting, and it's a great example of getting the park dedication to work quickly and effectively and get us something that we wouldn't have otherwise, and really appreciate the thoughtfulness of the landscape design and the thought about getting a connection, a safe pedestrian connection across the road. Anything we can do to make that happen, even if I would love to have it be a raised crosswalk, but whatever it is would be just really fantastic. So really appreciate the intentionality around all of this. So thank you very much. With that, all those in favor of Resolution 2018-321, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? So moved. I have one additional item that needs to be brought forward now for consideration at a future meeting, and I may need Council Rice's help in navigating this, but I'd like to make a motion to reconsider Resolution 2018-108, resolution denying modified encroachment permit for the use of 613 square feet of land encroaching upon park properties in front of 2863 Lake of the Isles Parkway East at Lake of the Isles Park. And do I need a second for that?
Not in committee.
All right. And I'll just say really briefly the rationale for this is there's a need for the property owner at this location to have access to their property in order to build their home. And I think it warrants further discussion and reconsideration by the board. But in order to do that, since the board has already voted on this item, I needed to make a motion to reconsider it at this time. Commissioner Meyer?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that this is to put this back on the agenda for the next meeting. We're not taking any action now.
Correct.
And so I'm going to vote in favor of it, even though I haven't had a chance to review the issue and why it is that we're reconsidering this. But
that is fair enough.
So I will vote in favor of that.
Fantastic. Any other questions, concerns? All those in favor of reconsidering Resolution 2018-108, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? So moved. Entertainment. Thank you. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Can I get another aye, maybe? Aye. Thank you. We are adjourned.